Big LEZ'S League, an all rugby league experience. Hello, welcome back to Big LEZ'S League. Welcome to another episode of Breaking Bread. I have been on a little bit of a hiatus the last 2 weeks and Isaac's been steering the ship, but we are back to obviously give the two takes from the podcaster and the journo. But Isaac, mate, how's the week of footy been? A lot of big news and, obviously a lot of Origin stuff, but plenty of other stuff happening behind the scenes that not a lot of people would know about as well, mate.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, when it comes to Origin week, I know everyone's all hectic about the team list and who got picked and who didn't get picked. But yeah, as you said, there's been a ton kind of going on behind the scenes and a lot of stories have been swept under the rug. But I guess that's what this show is for. Like, we could like to get stuck into the stories not everyone is aware of. And we got some spicy kind of discussion points here and I'm keen to get into it.
Mate, so keen to get stuck in. Let's fire up straight away. What have you got first on the list for me?
Yeah, sweet as. So I wanted to kind of get stuck into, before we kind of get into the all the stories and stuff, I wanted to kind of chat about kind of the interesting talking points around Origin and stuff like that. And so obviously, and I wanted to kind of get your thoughts a little bit as well. A few talking points around who's kind of been missing from the Origin squad. And I wanted to kind of get into the Blues first. And one of the stories that we covered last week, and if you listen to last week's episode, we kind of touched into it. But Spencer Leniu getting picked into this Origin squad. Gus Gould highlighted about how he shouldn't be picked in the side because, he doesn't offer enough as a player and is only playing around 20-25 minutes and he shouldn't be in the side. And so I thought that was an interesting pick that the Blues decided to go with Spencer Leniu on the bench. And also missing the likes of Tom Trbojevic, Terrell May, Luai. There are a few, missing key players as well as Max King making his debut as well. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts and see how you were kind of feeling about those kind of picks there.
Mate, it's a very interesting side. I think both New South Wales and Queensland, for the most part, like for New South Wales more so, it's pretty much exactly how he thought it was going to look other than a few different picks. Obviously with the Terrell May saga, that live stream on Twitch as well, and the things that he had said there, just the attitude and things like that sort of pulled him away from that Blues jersey in the end. So you sort of understand as to why Terrell May wasn't picked at the end of the day, but some of the other ones as well that you've got in there, Keon Kalamatangi for me after the performance on the weekend was pretty close, in my opinion at least. If I was a selector, I would have had a real close eye on him going into that last game. He brought up a few there. Jerome Luai not to be included in the squad in its entirety, not to have any coverage around the spine. Pappenhausen and Tedesco not to be in and around the squad. Wade Egan I thought was a guy that maybe should have been in and around the squad to give cover around 9. There are certainly a ton of picks that have sort of gone under the rug there, and then guys that haven't been picked. I do love the Max King pick. I think that, he's a guy that works hard, fights for every inch. And I just think that him and Spencer Leniu could build a real little nice combo coming off the bench, which will more so leave for the preview. But I really do like that little 1-2 punch there that those guys bring. And as for the Spencer Leniu pick, I mean, we've seen the impact that he can have in the Origin arena and what he can do off the bench. We saw it last year, the instant impact that he had around the ruck as well. He's a smaller forward, real tough and physical, aggressive. Even the first 15 minutes of the game on the Roosters on the weekend and what he was doing to Max King, even though he dropped the ball on the first carry, he set the tone with his aggression for the entire game. So I think that Spencer Leniu had to be there off the back of last year and just some of the things and the little signs and intricacies, that we've seen in his game. But look, mate, I think the big question I've got for you is, and I know a lot of the people on my end are going to hear my thoughts on the Origin side regardless on the podcast today. But my question for you, mate, is out of all of these, what one surprised you the most for New South Wales as a guy that got snubbed or someone that got picked you reckon should have been left out?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Look, for me, I thought the most interesting one, and I think it has a little bit more to do with what's going on behind the scenes and maybe discussions that were had. But no Tom Trbojevic in this side. To have a blue side that features no Trbojevic is, I actually don't remember the last time we had a blue side without a Trbojevic in it, which is absolutely huge. Obviously, Zach Lomax got that wing spot. and you had, Jacob Corral's last minute pull out with an injury. I don't know what his chances were to be in the side to begin with as well. But, to have no Tom Trbojevic and also no Jerome Luai, I think are both really huge snubs. And if I'm being quite honest, I would have probably had both of them in my side, at least somewhere, even if it's an 18th man or on the bench. But look, other than that, when you discuss like the whole Terrell May thing, while I would have had him in my Blues side, that whole live stream saga was a little bit of as a Blues fan, it was a bit of a turn off, and I don't want someone who's able to flip on the state so easily to be representing the state. But yeah, look, for me, like to not have a 4-time premiership winner in Jerome Luai and, one of the greatest, outside backs of all time in Tom Trbojevic, I think are two really big calls. But look, as for the rest of the side, I'm pretty happy with how it's all laid out. I thought another interesting talking point was Isaiah Yeo being named as skipper. Obviously, he was the front runner to be the captain, and many would argue he was basically the captain in last year's series. And while I agree with the pick, I think that Isaiah Yeo should just be the skipper for this year, and that next year, Laurie Daly or whoever's coaching the Blues next year needs to make a decision between either Cameron Murray, Nathan Cleary, or Stephen Crichton. So we do have a skipper for the next 5 to 10 years. But other than that, I think I'm pretty happy with how the Blues squad has kind of been laid out, and I'm keen to kind of see how they all go.
Yeah, same, man. I'm really keen to see how this side goes, and look, I think that, as I said, for New South Wales at least, it's pretty close to what a lot of people would have had for their New South Wales side. Only a few intricacies and different changes there, and some people might not agree with. I think the big one was the extended bench for me. Not so much the 17, because I like the 17 that we've got, but the extended bench for me, not that I disagree with the players, because Amole, Stefano, these sort of guys were always going to be in the frame. Campbell Graham, I think, was a huge call. Obviously been up and down this year, hasn't really stood out. And this is coming from a South fan as well, hasn't really stood out, for the majority of the year, been, on the wing for most games, in the centres for a few games, been alternating between the two, has been tough, has been physical, he's been good in defence, and I guess that's what you want coming into New South Wales, and it is good cover for Critter, who obviously has a little bit of a groin injury. But I think that it's still a big call, but I also think that with a 20-man squad, you sort of want coverage for your spine. There is absolutely no coverage for the spine, and it puts a ton of pressure on Connor Watson to cover a ton of positions. He has to cover halfback, 5'8", fullback, and 9 if any spine members do get injured in this game or during the game or anything. So I think that that's a pretty big call by Laurie Daly, and it shows a lot of confidence to say we're not picking any spine members in this extended bench to cover any of those positions if someone goes down, whether that be a Ryan Pappenhausen, whether it be a James Tedesco, whether it be a Jerome Luai. I would have had someone there that could cover a ton of positions. Even a Dylan Walker. Like, if Dylan Walker got named to jersey 20, I would have been happy with that as well, because at least then you have someone that can cover a ton of positions, and similar to a Connor Watson that can play through the middle as well. So it's definitely an interesting call. It's a big call by Laurie Daly with the makeup of his squad, but I'm keen to see if it pays off. Let's move to Queensland, mate. What are some of the big calls or some things that you've got down for Queensland?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, maybe this is my Blues bias, but I've actually got a lot more issues with the Queensland side than the Blues side, and not just issues, but interesting talking points as well. So obviously, Pong has been picked at fullback now. Obviously, Reece Walsh has been injured and wasn't available for selection, anyways. But I believe, regardless of if Walsh was injured or not, I think that Ponga had that spot, and I don't see a world where Walsh reclaims that jersey. And if he does, it's purely just, because Billy Slater's got faith in him and not due to the football, because I think at no point in either of their careers has Walsh been a better player than Ponga. So I love the pick for Ponga at 1, and I don't want to see him taken out of that jersey at any point in the next few years. Rob Toya, debut. Very interesting. Probably not what I would have gone with. You got a guy like Dane Gagai who, yes, he's not what he once was, and he just, played his 300th game in the NRL recently. But, if you're picking for Origin, you've got guys who've proven themselves in, for example, like a Dane Gagai or even a Kurt Capewell who, yes, both kind of in the twilight of their careers, but to throw a Rob Toya in at center, not even in the extended squad, just straight into the starting 17 is a huge call. And look, Billy Slater he's a mastermind when it comes to picking his side. And so I do have faith in the fact that, he knows what he's doing. But look, I think it's a little too early to have him in. And I would have had Dane Gagai. The halves, DCE and Munster, right picks. I would have gone with them as well. Dearden at 14 is a little bit questionable for me. I don't know if I love having Dearden there. I think that Dearden will be, one of the great Queensland Maroons by the end of his career. And I think you have plenty of, opportunity to play in the halves moving forward. But I don't think, you throw him in just for the sake of throwing him in. I would have had Kurt Mann at 14, who can cover, exactly like a Connor Watson. He's the exact same archetype as a Connor Watson. I would have had him as my 14. I've also got, Jeremiah Nanai from the Cowboys starting over Beau Fermor. Completely disagree with this one. I think Nanai is way too hot and cold to be such a consistent player in the Origin arena. And I think Beau Fermor has been absolutely brilliant for the Titans this year in a struggling Titans outfit. And I also think that, I've got Tino front row and Paddy 13 here. And honestly, I would have had them swapped around. I would have had Tino in the 13 and Paddy in the front row. And also just not having David Fafita and Corey Horsburgh on this side, I think are both really huge misses from Billy Slater as well. I know there's been a lot of controversy with David Fafita and if he is even a first-grade footballer. But for me, he's still the best back row in the comp, if not top three. And, as for Horsburgh, I think he's taken his game to another level once again at the Raiders. So those are two huge misses for me in this Queensland outfit.
Look, as soon as Dave Fafita got dropped to Q Cup for me, there was no chance that he was going to make the Queensland side. I get your argument, like what can Dave Fafita be at his best around a good side? Coming in for Queensland, he would have done a great job. Obviously out for a few weeks with a foot injury as well. He's just had surgery on that. So, that pretty much rules him out altogether. Corey Horsburgh, though, is the big one for me. To go with Trent Liero and Beau Fermor over Corey Horsburgh, to go with Lindsay Collins and Mo Fodawaker over Corey Horsburgh as well, particularly with the form that Horsburgh's been in at the moment. There's no real concern around an injury there for Corey Horsburgh, at least nothing that we've heard of. So that for me that's the biggest call, I think, out of all of them. I think if you had to pinpoint the biggest call, out of all of these Origin snubbings, that one for me is the biggest, just in regards to the impact that he could have off the bench, being that big physical guy, going at this New South Wales pack, contending with a guy like Spencer Leniu, a guy like Max King, going at those guys. The size off the bench does worry me. Lindsay Collins and some of his defensive efforts on the weekend, that worries me, bringing him into the Queensland side. He's a guy that after the game against the Dogs, I probably, based off that game alone, wouldn't have had him in my Queensland team. Yes, he's done some great things for Queensland in the past, but I just feel like at the moment he needs to get that game fitness back first, and it just doesn't look like he has that at the moment. Had two big opportunities. I think one of them it might have even been Bailey Hayward, run straight past him through the middle when he was running back to get into the defensive line. He had another big missed tackle through the middle, or maybe even Burton, I think, for the Burton try. Just some real bad defensive misses. Doesn't look fit. Only played, I think, 25 to 30 minutes on the weekend. I just wouldn't have had Lindsay Collins there. Corey Horsburgh, on the other hand, can play big minutes. If there's injuries, he can come on and play a role. So for me, that is probably the bigger call out of all of them. I also think that, with Trent Liero and Beau Fermor on the bench, Beau Fermor's not coming on in the middle. He has to come on an edge, which means you're going to have to move probably Ruben Cotter to the middle of the field. That's probably how I would see things happening. Obviously these forwards that are starting are going to play big minutes, but it does put a lot of pressure on them to play big minutes as well. Trent Liero's played big minutes throughout the year, but is he going to be able to handle the physicality through the middle? You know, he gives away quite a few penalties in games, particularly over the last few weeks as well, which sort of hurts a little bit. I know that Billy Slater is a big fan of Trent Liero, and, you know, he has become a much better player to what he was 2 years ago as well. But it's a big risk to take. And I just don't know over a few other guys like a Corey Horsburgh if it was the right call to make. So, yeah, look, it'll be interesting to see what happens there, if there are any late changes to the side, and we do see a few mixes and matches before kickoff for Queensland. But yeah, it's a big call. And as for Rob Toyer, like for Rob Toyer, I don't necessarily mind it in the sense that I think that he could come in and do a good job for Queensland. I think that he's got enough skill on that right edge. You pair him with DCE, you pair him with Holmes. He's going to be a good footballer. He does still have a few errors in his game. He's still very raw, but we've seen plenty of players in the past actually come in with only a few games of NRL experience. Payne Haas, 2019, he comes in with 10 games of NRL experience. I think Brad Fittler had 14 games, 12 games before he made his Origin debut. Ben Ikin had 4 games before he came in and made his Queensland debut. Like, this has happened in the past. Is Rob Toyer at the level of those players, though? That's the question you got to throw up. Is he, you know, does he have the potential of those guys? Certainly. Does he have the ceiling of those guys? Certainly. But is he at the level that those guys were at with those 10 games to be able to warrant Queensland selection over Dane Gagai, over a few other guys that could have been picked? I know that there's injuries to Cobbo and Taulungi, which has obviously opened that door. Would you even have gone to Xavier Savage in the back line and moved Holmes to centre? Maybe that's a play. There's certainly a few guys. Philip Sami's played a game for Queensland. Like, he's been in great form all year. That's going to be a big thing. And if Queensland come out and lose, you know, in a big way, and Robert Toyer has a few bad defensive reads, which he has had for the Roosters this year, there's going to be a lot of question marks around Billy Slater, and he probably loses his job by the end of the series if they go ahead and lose game one in a big way. I think it's only going to take game one with the amount of risk that he's taken with this 17. If he loses game one 13 plus, I think that he finishes the series, but then next year they probably look for another Queensland coach, which is a big call, but that's how much pressure he's put on himself coming off a losing series and picking a bunch of guys that, you know, are making their Queensland debuts, taking these level of risks. He has put a little bit more pressure on himself to go out and win game one. So it'll be interesting, but I can't wait to see if maybe Billy Slater comes out in game one and proves us all wrong, and they end up winning that game as well. So that's going to be big. I can't wait for it. It's obviously at Suncorp game one, so we'll have to wait and see. But I'll get a little bit stucker into more stuck into the combos and things like that in my little reaction that's going to come out tomorrow on the podcast. But mate, what else have you got for me in regards to any of the news updates? Let's go move forward.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And look, we can sit here and talk about Origin all day, but yeah, we actually got a ton of news that's kind of come out in the last week that's really interesting. And the one that I found to be kind of the most, that stood out to me in the last week is obviously the biggest transfer lately has been Brandon Smith moving from the Sydney Roosters over to the South Sydney Rabbitohs. So another chapter in the rivalry between the two clubs, with Smith making his way over to Redfern. So essentially on NRL 360, we had a few of the analysts kind of discussing what this move means for both clubs. And we got a few kind of inside looks and behind the scenes news around kind of how this whole transfer took place. And the Roosters have actually been labelled as shameless in how they've kind of handled Brandon Smith and his tenure at the club. So coming on to NRL 360, Braithen Astor was the first to kind of discuss it, and he basically said that the club signed a 13 in Brandon Smith and try to make him into a 9, and believes that the Roosters recruitment there, they completely dropped the ball there because they did need a specialist 9, which was really interesting to kind of, because obviously Brandon Smith did want to play as hooker, and now he makes his way over to the Rabbitohs where, you've got Peter Mamazelos and you've got Cameron Murray. And so I'll be keen to kind of see where Brandon Smith does fit into that over the next couple seasons. You've also got Andrew Webster, who came on, and he actually discussed how the Roosters have reacted to the news of Brandon Smith leaving. So Andrew Webster revealed that the Roosters were actually celebrating as soon as Smith walked out the door after having some chats with Nick Politis, the Roosters chairman, which is, and he labeled it essentially as shameless and said that, after promising Brandon Smith the world just 2 years ago, telling him that, Trent Robinson invited him over to his house for pizza and told him, he's going to make him into a better man and he's part of the club's future for the next decade. And then just 2 years later, they kicked him out the door and they were essentially celebrating behind the scenes, which is, it's really poor from the Sydney Roosters, if I'm being honest. And it just kind of goes to show kind of where the club is at when it comes to negotiations and kind of how they deal with star signings. And Paul Crawley, another journalist, also touched on this and essentially said that the club was, super hyped about having Brandon Smith there until Reece Robson came along and the opportunity to sign him. And that's kind of where they began to kind of squeeze Brandon Smith out of the club. And Smith came out on multiple occasions and said how he didn't feel wanted at the Sydney Roosters and that he didn't know if he would be playing for the club ever again. And obviously he's now made his way over to the Rabbitohs. And another interesting thing when it comes to his move to the Rabbitohs is a big factor behind why the Roosters wanted to bring Smith into the club, according to the journos on NRL 360, is that the club was keen to get one over Wayne Bennett as well. And, obviously Wayne Bennett was at the Dolphins at the time and was keen to bring him in. And the Roosters, Nick Politis, was actually really keen to just get one over Wayne Bennett. And that was part of their whole celebration at the time. But obviously he's now made his way over to Redfern under Wayne Bennett. And by all accounts, he looks like he's absolutely loving his time there so far. And from a personal opinion, I think that this is the best move of his career so far. And I think he's going to kill it over there at the Rabbitohs.
Well, look, first up, I think people will also forget as well, Brandon Smith actually came out on the ICE project with Isaac John just before anything had come out about him going to the Roosters, and actually said how much he wanted to be a Rooster and how much he wanted to, get into that environment as well. Obviously, there was a lot of chat around his contract at that time and things like that, and that pretty much sealed the deal that he was going to the Roosters. The fact that he wanted to be there. You touched on it, the fact that, Trent Robinson had promised him the world, taken him to his house and things like that. But you're right, like the treatment of star players at the Roosters of late in regards to their recruitment and the way that they've handled certain things so far has been quite interesting. I mean, only how long has it been now? 4 to 5 months ago, we were talking about Terrell May as well. Terrell May, that situation and how that was handled as well. Obviously being the star there through the middle of the field, out of absolutely nowhere, he gets let go by the club. He goes to the Tigers, and he's killing it there now. Gee, the Roosters, I bet they wish they would have him back in their side as well and a part of their rotation, because they seem to need him a little bit with how thin their pack is at the moment. But yeah, like just a few things like that over the past few years in regards to some of their stars. It has been handled quite poorly. And it is going to be interesting to see, when Reece Robson does get to the club and, if they do end up landing DCE and things like that, how those situations are handled as well. Because that, if those guys don't fit the mold of a Roosters player, that's going to be a really interesting point in the next 18 months where we sort of sit here and go, well, what happened there? So be interesting to see how they handle those situations. It's not only really star players, but just the development of some young guys as well at the club. For the Roosters, it has been poor as well. Just some of the young guys that are at the club at the moment. I mean, Robert Toyer, we've waited a while due to injury as well, but we've waited a while for him to come in. There's been a few other guys as well in regards to the development at the Roosters, some young guys that they've taken much longer to develop, like Siwa Wong, for example. It's only really this year where he's sort of seen, the best of him. He's been, with the Roosters and playing first grade for 2.5 years now. So that development has taken a while to really see that the full fruits of that labour, and just a few other young players there as well. It has been quite interesting, the development tracks there. So Look, obviously this situation's been handled poorly. Looking at it from a Rabbitohs perspective, though, Brandon Smith under Wayne Bennett, it is going to be great to see Wayne Bennett and what he can do with a guy like Brandon Smith, the way that he gets used. I think you'll see Brandon Smith most likely play a bit of 9 to start the first 20 minutes of games and then move into a lock forward position. That's probably the smartest move there for Brandon Smith. And for Wayne Bennett as well, with a rotation to the club. And I think, if he comes in over the next 5 weeks, I think he'll just probably play straight up lock as well to accommodate for the fact that Cameron Murray's not in the side as well. He just adds that, smaller body, the leg speed, quick play the balls. He can be that 13 for them. And just tough as nails defensively. He's going to come out and smash blokes. The Tallis Duncan, Brandon Smith combo is going to be wild too at the South Sydney Rabbitohs. Those guys coming out of the line and smashing blokes. But, yeah, I love it. I think that Wayne's going to get the best out of Brandon Smith, and I think you said it best, mate. It's going to be probably the best move of Brandon Smith's career. What's next for us on the chopping block, mate?
Yeah, absolutely, man. And the next kind of 2 stories are steering back into that origin lane, but some stories that, a lot of people may not really be aware of. So first up, what I've got is about State of Origin, but the women's game. So as many of you would know, we just watched, the Blues win the State of Origin series for this year in Game 2, flogging Queensland just last week. And so the New South Wales coach, John Strange, who's the father of Jasmine and Ethan Strange, both NRL and NRLW players, has pushed for the Women's Origin to be played in Vegas over the next few years. So interesting kind of talking point. Obviously, the NRLW made their way over to Vegas this year in 2025, and it was an absolutely shocking match. The Gillaroos smashed England 94-0, and it was just it was not a good game of footy if you were watching it. So the NRL have scrapped the NRLW game from the Vegas event, at least for the time being, with Peter V'landys coming out and admitting it probably wasn't the right move for the event. However, the New South Wales coach has come out and he said that he believes that over the next few seasons, the NRL should make an effort to integrate the Women's Origin match into the Vegas event. And it's interesting because, the Game 2, which was just last week, had record-breaking numbers. And if you want a kind of comparison, the event smashed the AFL with a national average of 1,067,000, which was almost double that of the AFL's match between Hawthorn and the Gold Coast, which only received 545,000 average viewers. So essentially doubled an AFL clash, which, is a huge win for women's sport. For those who have kind of been following just Australian sport over the last 5 to 10 years, to see such a huge jump for a women's match. It's amazing just for footy fans, for sports fans in Australia, and it really points towards an upward trajectory for the women's game in Australia. And so I think that, if John Strange can kind of have his way over the next few years, we will see the Women's Origin just get bigger and bigger and have more eyes glued to the screen. And as these women kind of become, more of household names and these matches become, highly televised and across the country, I think it definitely would be a good idea to introduce that game into the Vegas event over the next few years. I believe the Vegas contract right now is going for a couple more years until they have to renew it. So potentially within the next 2 to 3 years, if they can introduce the Origin match into it, I think that would be a really cool spectacle. And obviously, as we kind of touched on, the upward trajectory of Origin at the moment for the women's game, if they can keep that steady viewership going over the next few seasons, I think it would be a really good move for not only the NRLW, but for Australian sport in general.
100%. Look, to be honest, I'd probably prefer the international game for the women to be held in Vegas rather than the Origin. I think that Origin's at a perfect time. You have all the Origin games in the same month. Obviously, with Game 3 this year being close to Game 1 of the men's game this year, you've obviously got the under-19s match as well, which is always a great watch, especially to see the young juniors and a few guys coming through the ranks, some guys that could be playing first grade relatively soon. I think that it's a great sort of spectacle to have at this stage of the year, so I'd probably keep Origin at this stage of the year. I think that with the international game in Vegas last year, it was the right idea with the wrong teams. I think that England and the English Rugby League for the women over in the Super League isn't at the level that the Australian game is at for the women. I think that the women in Australia in the NRLW, they are on a instrumentally larger skill level to the women in England, and that's no disrespect to the Super League girls. Like, there's been some great games over there. You've seen some viral highlights come out over in England with a few of the tries that some of the Huddersfield girls have scored over the past week, and there's been some great moments over there. But I just think if we're comparing, the two, I think that the NRLW girls have a lot more skill and X factor to what the Super League girls have currently at the moment. And I think that we saw that in that international game, because those two teams versed, and what was it, 90-something nil? Like, that just shows you that it was the right idea, because Australia is a very skilled team. Probably would have sent the Kiwis over there instead. The Kiwis have a better team, with a lot more NRLW talent in it. That probably would have brought it to Australia, and that probably would have been a little bit of a better competition. It's not really the best idea sending... I get it, you want to obviously have that Super League representation with the England ladies coming over as well, but with the difference in skill level and how much Australia dominated, it's not really showcasing their game as something that's, amazing. It's actually like putting the game in a bit of a poor light, because you're looking at these girls coming over from England, coming a long way to play in this game for their country. You look at it and go, geez, the women's game's not in a great place right now. It puts that part of the game in a real tough light. So if we were to get two even teams in Australia and the Kiwi Ferns to play, you'd have a much more competition in that regard. It'd be a lot better of a watch going over there as well. You'd get a lot more numbers, and you would, it'd be a much more entertaining game and a lot closer of a game as well. And you could see how well of position the girls' game is at the moment. I think we saw a great representation of it actually in the Origin series so far this year for the women. The past two games have been outstanding. Really enjoyed the last two games. Obviously, in game one, New South Wales were dominant, but game two was a real fight and a real grudge match. So the women's game's in a great place. And I think that the way that we show that isn't with showcasing the Super League ladies, because they're not in the position that the ladies over here playing NRLW are in at the moment. Australia Kiwis would be perfect. I think that those two, you get an actual competition out of it. It'd be a great way to showcase the game. And yeah, it would be better than sending two NRLW teams over there and showcasing a fraction of the talent when you can get the best of the best for the ladies over there. It'd be even better than State of Origin, in my opinion, because you're getting that Kiwi representation. And yeah, I think it'd be the best way to showcase the women's game. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I definitely can kind of see where you're coming from. And I do think that, especially when you're moving over to an international stage, having as much international representation is really important. I think that because the NRL is obviously wanting to integrate the Super League into into our game as much as they can, and obviously now with the NRL, buying a portion of the Super League, I find it hard to kind of see if they would want to move away from the England girls and move over to the Kiwi girls if they're wanting to get that representation over there. But I agree with you that unfortunately, and it's not the England girls' fault, but the women's game in England just simply hasn't gotten the structures put in place that the Australian girls have over here with the NRLW. I can see what you're saying when it comes to obviously the NRLW State of Origin being around the same time as the men's Origin and the under-19s, and that being a really great spectacle. But on the flip side, I also think that we are spoiled. We're spoiled with Origin at this time of the year, and if we can spread that out throughout the year, I think it's never a bad thing. Would it be overshadowed by the beginning of the NRL season, having that at the exact same time? I'm not too sure. But if you're wanting to get the best of the best over there, I don't think there's any better than having New South Wales versus Queensland, and we saw that in such both matches. Even though the Blues obviously have won pretty convincingly, the Queensland girls were still excellent. And if you send that Queensland side over to versus the England side, I still think we would have seen a similar result as the Australian versus England side. So I would love to see Origin make its way over there. How it would work logistically with having game 2 and game 3 kind of spread over the course of that 6 to 8 weeks, the beginning of the NRL season. I'm not too sure how that would work. But I definitely can see where Strange is coming from in regards to wanting to get the best of the best over there. But you said it, man. Like it's just amazing to kind of see where the Australian women's game has kind of gone to the point where they're flogging to beat any team 94-0 is, it's commendable regardless of, what sport you're playing and what grade you're playing. So it's really awesome to see where the women's game is at. I wouldn't be introducing it back to the Vegas arena until we've established a steady audience over there. So maybe in the next 2 to 3 years. But I definitely think that the girls need to make their way back over to Allegiant Stadium at some point in the next 5 years or so.
I think you could definitely do it this year if it was Australia and New Zealand. Because as I said, I think that they're in a strong enough place. I think England, it's going to be a long time before we see the England girls get up to a level where, the Australian and the Kiwi girls are at. Look, and it's not even, it's not even a diss on where the Super League women's game is at. Like, if you were to compare NRL and Super League for the men, NRL's still at a much higher level to what the Super League is. Like, NRL players go over to the Super League once they're close to retirement. Like, that's at the level the Super League is at. So, and look, again, that's no disrespect on the Super League because there's plenty of talented players in the Super League at the moment. Like Matt Duffy's killing it at the moment. Brodie Croft's over there playing extremely well. Jackson Hastings in his time there was a man of steel player. You've got some great players over in the Super League at the moment for sure. Matty Ashton as well, who carved up when he came over here in that Super League game for in Las Vegas, and every time he plays for England as well, he seems to always carve us up. The players that we've gotten over from the Super League in Herbie Farnworth, Dominic Young, Matty Nicholson just recently for Canberra has been excellent as well. So, James Graham from a few years ago, obviously going over from the Super League over to the Bulldogs as well. We get some great players over from the Super League, so it's no disrespect to them. But what I will say is, NRL is still at a much higher level than what the Super League is for the men's game. And it's the exact same for the women's game, and especially with the women's game being a lot earlier on to what the NRL is in regards to how long it's been around. You can expect that, the women's game over in England is probably at its grassroots. It's probably just starting up, and it needs time to develop. It needs time to, get more women involved in Super League football. And I think we'll probably get a taste of it because you'd imagine that a few of the older girls, from NRLW might look to go over there as well. And I think if that was the case and we sort of started to see a little bit more of that become commonplace as well, you could see that, the Super League football for the women over there develop instrumentally as well, because you get some well-known names going over there. Imagine an Ali Bringenshaw going over to play for Wakefield or something. Like, that would be insane, and she'd kill it over there as well. So definitely for something as well for us to think about. But I think in regards to when the England women's game is going to be, probably coming back onto that sort of stage, I think it's going to take a long while, and I think we've really got to focus on developing that part of the game as well for the women over there, so I can get to the level of the Australian women's game and where that's at as well. But look, I think that we could definitely get away with it if they wanted to add the game in. With the Australian side going up against the Kiwis, it'd be a real great game. And I think it wouldn't be that lopsided scoreline we saw against England.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And kind of discussing, England and Super League kind of moves us into the next story that I've got here. And we had a little bit of a chat about it before we came on, and I'm keen to just get a little bit of a deeper dive into this story. So Herbie Farnworth, who is from England himself, made his way over to Queensland when he was around 15 years old. Farnworth has come out and he has said essentially that he would love to play for Queensland, much to the dismay of Maroons legend Darren Lockyer. So essentially he's come out and he has said that he believes that because he's been, Queenslander since he was around 14, 15 years old. He believes that he's got deep ties to the state and, would make the state proud if he were to enter the Origin arena. And he said, he was honest. He goes, I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to play for the Maroons. I think I do a really good job for them. And he believes that although the rules most likely won't change, he feels that he should be able to play for the Maroons because, he's been there for, the last 10 years or so, which Darren Lockyer has completely brushed off and shot down. Lockyer's come out and he's basically said that, you need to have been living in the States since before you started school. That's the quote that he kind of gave, saying that you need to be, essentially born and bred in either New South Wales or Queensland to play for your state. And he touched on a kind of a popular talking point when it comes to Origin eligibility and stuff, with a lot of people saying you need the best of the best in the Origin arena. But Darren Lockyer's basically said that, that's not necessarily the case, in that, it actually has more to do with the passion and the pride for the jersey and the state. Because once you start allowing these international players to come in to the Origin arena, you do lose a bit of that grit and a bit of that passion. And it becomes essentially just like an international game, with no real fire. And, as a Blues fan, I don't want anyone playing for my state who isn't, fired up for the state and has, a real deep tie. And I kind of think back to, although completely different circumstances, I think back to Tavita Pangai playing for the Blues a couple years ago. And there was a huge talking point how, earlier in his career, he said he wanted to play for the Maroons. And to have someone who wanted to play for the Maroons playing for the Blues as a fan, I hated it. And it's similar to Terrell May now, basically saying, maybe he should switch allegiance to Queensland, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, you need players in the either sky blue jersey or in the maroon jersey who love the state and love the jersey. So I definitely see where Darren Lockyer is coming from here. And while I'm sure Herbie Farnworth means well, and I'm sure he does love Queensland, I don't think his place is in the maroon side.
Yep, I pretty much agree with everything you said, mate. I was just looking up Herbie Farnworth and where he was born, Burnley in the United Kingdom. Sounds like it's in Queensland, doesn't it? Yeah, look, I agree with Lockie. I think that there's a line, and Herbie Farnworth coming over from the United Kingdom, that's the line there. I think you can't have someone that was born in England. He's got a Pommy accent. It would just look wrong. I think that if he'd come over when he was maybe, I'd say 6, 7 years old, I'd maybe get it. But when you've come over and you're 15 years old, you've already had an introduction to rugby league. You both your parents are from England as well, I'm guessing. It just wouldn't make much sense for him to pull on a Queensland jersey. It really wouldn't. And I'd hate to say it, to be honest, because then they would open the window for a lot of other guys that probably shouldn't be playing State of Origin to come in and play as well. So Herbie Farnworth for me is a no. As much as I would love to see it in a Blues jersey, not in a Queensland jersey. As much as I'd love to see it, I think that he obviously has already played for England as well. It just wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. I think that he is an out-and-out Englishman, an out-and-out Pom, and he kills it for England. I just don't want to see him in an Origin jersey. It wouldn't make much sense. It's a ridiculous talking point, to be honest, in my opinion. I just think that, it's a real dumb talking point in general. I just think that he's a Pom. He should be playing for England. And that's pretty much the end of the story there. As I said, it just opened a really cooked bag of worms where, a lot of other guys would be coming in wanting to do the same sort of thing. And I think Lockie's exactly right. You've got to have that pride for Queensland, born in Queensland. And that probably wasn't there for Herbie Farnworth, who's already playing for England in the international stage and things like that. So, that's my 2 cents on it, mate. Are you sort of down the same sort of route?
Yeah, man. And look, it's really easy for these guys to come in and see the spectacle of Origin and basically view it as an all-star match. But that's not what it is. It's not what it is. And, and we get really fired up about it because we're so passionate for our Blues and for our state. And that's because we're born and bred here, like we bleed blue, and it's the same for the Maroons, And so when you've got guys who have come over from, England or New Zealand or any of these overseas countries, while you absolutely love having them in the game, and I don't think, to lose a guy like Farnworth from the NRL would absolutely be devastating because he's one of the best players in the comp, and, a top 3 in his position. And so while we absolutely love having them in the NRL, I don't think that, even making comments like, I'd love to play for Queensland because I came here when I was 15. I think it almost disrespects what Origin is about. And I think that it kind of diminishes what it really means to those who have been born and bred here or came here at a really young age. And while I know it opens a can of worms with the whole eligibility thing and the allegiance thing, early in the season with Payne Haas and Tino, basically wanting to play for another country. And there's been a lot of chatter around that. I still think that this is a black and white situation where, unfortunately, you are born in a different country and you've spent more of your life in that country than in this one. And so for me personally, it's a no as well. And honestly, I think if I'm Farnworth, I'm really proud to be playing for England on the international stage and being, the best player, if not like one of the best players for my country. Because it's guys like Farnworth who are growing the international game and making it more competitive. And so for me personally, it's a no. It's not even a talking point. And if, no disrespect to Farnworth, but I would have much rather hear him come out and show his love for England and his his respect for Origin, in the sense that, I have no intention to play in Origin because I'm not from here. So again, I'm essentially on the exact same page as you. And I really hope that the NRL isn't pressured in the future to make changes like this, because I agree with Lockie. Like it diminishes what the state of Origin is about, and it might as well then just be an all-star match.
Yeah, 100%. I 100% agree. And if that's what they want, bring the All-Stars game back. Bring it back and have a World All-Stars team where all of these guys can play and you can see the best of the best going at it. Even if, you have the Indigenous v Māori All-Star game, but then you also have a 2-team draft system like the NBA All-Stars, where you have, 2 captains and they pick a 17 each and they go out and play each other at the start of the year. Like, that would be awesome. Bring that sort of thing into the game. Because then, you'd have less players that aren't eligible to play for New South Wales or Queensland more keen to play in that, because it's something that they're allowed to play and you have no sort of ties as to, you have to come from this place and blah, 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 blah. If you're talented enough, you get picked in these sort of teams, and it would pretty much close all those doors directly. So, look, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Obviously, there's a lot more concern around the eligibility factor for Queensland for those who are born in Tonga and Samoa and have those ties as well. These sort of guys, maybe if they get brought up to Tier 1 nations, won't be able to play in State of Origin, and then that's going to be a big talking point in itself. But in regards to the English bag of worms, the only player that from England that I want to play in State of Origin is Victor Radley, and that's it. I think that he's probably the only exception to the rule. If other than that, I just don't want to see it, because it's going to open up an ugly bag of worms, but it's also going to look wrong. And if Herbie Farnworth was to get picked over a young bloke that has been born in Queensland and stuff like that, it would piss me off, to be honest. It would really annoy me. So let's close up that bag of worms before we open it any further. Isaac, another great week going through all the news in the NRL. What's coming up for yourself, mate? Anything big coming up on your end?
Yeah, man. Look, we're still plugging along for over at Zero Tackle. So for those of you who don't know, always publishing news pieces through Zero Tackle. So if you're keen on kind of getting the latest in footy and around footy, just head over to zerotackle.com. Alternatively, you can just head over to my Instagram, to Isaac Issa _journalist. And I just publish basically everything to do with NRL, all the biggest talking points, and a lot of the things that we kind of chat about on here. And yeah, just plugging along, getting Zero Tackle done, doing some work over the ABC as well. And yeah, just, keep continuing the grind as we get into kind of the colder months. How about yourself, man?
Look, nothing happened on my end, mate. Nothing happening on my end. Just getting stuck into this Origin content. It's obviously going to be a big next few weeks for us at Big LEZ'S League for Origin. So make sure to get stuck into all of this great content, guys. Breaking Bread's going to be around all through the season. So make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube to not miss out. We'll see you guys in the next one.